I never thought my job as a courthouse clerk in Boston would lead me into the biggest legal scandal of the decade. My name is Emily Parker, and for the past 7 years, I've been filing paperwork, organizing case documents, and basically keeping the wheels of justice turning in Suffolk County. Not exactly the stuff of headline news, until 3 months ago. It was a Friday afternoon in April, the kind where everyone's already mentally checked out for the weekend. Judge Harrington's office had requested some files for an upcoming property dispute case, Westland Development versus the City of Boston. Standard stuff. The case involves some prime waterfront property that had been slated for affordable housing, but somehow ended up in private hands. The developer wanted to build luxury condos, and the city was fighting it. Emily, can you pull the Westland files? Margaret, my supervisor, called across our shared office space. Judge needs them by end of day. I nodded, pushing away from my desk. The records room was my second home, a basement labyrinth of filing cabinets and boxes that only made sense if you'd spent years navigating them like I had. The Westland case was relatively new, so I found the box easily enough. But as I was leafing through the documents, a yellowed envelope slipped out from between 2 folders. It wasn't properly labeled or filed, just stuck in there like someone had hidden it. My first instinct was to put it back. My job was to find what was requested, not go digging through random papers, but the envelope was unsealed, and I could see the letterhead of the mayor's office peeking out. Something felt off. I glanced around. The records room was empty, as usual on a Friday afternoon. Carefully, I slid the letter out. Westland, Property Acquisition, the heading read. It was dated 18 months ago, well before the current lawsuit had been filed. My eyes scanned down to the second paragraph. As discussed in our meeting, while the public narrative will maintain this land is designated for affordable housing development, we've secured agreement from all necessary parties to transfer ownership to Westland following the mandatory public comment period. Your client has no cause for concern. The opposition has no legal claim that will stand scrutiny in my courtroom. The letter was signed by Judge William Harrington himself, addressed to Martin Schultz, the attorney representing Westland Development. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just improper. It was corruption, plain and simple. The judge had already decided the case before it even came to court. He was working with the developers to steal land meant for affordable housing. I quickly took out my phone and snapped photos of the letter, making sure to capture the letterhead, signature, and all identifying information. Then I carefully returned it to exactly where I'd found it and gathered the requested files. That weekend was the longest of my life. I kept thinking about the families who needed affordable housing in our increasingly expensive city, about the backroom deals that apparently happened all the time, about my career, which would almost certainly end if I did what I was considering. By Monday morning, I'd made my decision. I contacted a lawyer friend from college, Sarah Nguyen, who now worked for a nonprofit focused on government accountability. Emily, this is dynamite, she said, after examining the photos. But you need to be careful. These people have power. They can make your life very difficult. I know, I replied, but I can't just let this go. Sarah advised me to follow proper whistleblower protocols. We documented when and how I found the letter. She helped me prepare a statement, and together we approached the State Ethics Commission. I also secured the original letter from the records room, properly this time, with documentation of its removal. What I didn't expect was the wall of silence. 2 weeks passed with no acknowledgement from the Ethics Commission. My calls went unreturned. Sarah was getting stonewalled too. They're burying it, she finally said during a hushed phone call. Someone higher up doesn't want this investigated. That's when I realized I'd need to go public. With Sarah's help, I compiled everything: the letter, my statement, the timeline of events, and our attempts to report through official channels. We created a digital file with video of me explaining what I'd found and why it mattered. Ready? Sarah asked as her finger hovered over the send button. We'd prepared emails to every major news outlet in the region, plus several national ones. I took a deep breath. Do it. Within hours, my phone was buzzing nonstop. By the next morning, my face was on the front page of the Boston Globe. Courthouse whistleblower exposes judicial corruption, the headline screamed. The first few days after the story broke were complete chaos. News vans camped outside my apartment building. My social media accounts exploded with friend requests and messages. My mother called from New Hampshire, panic in her voice. "Emily, what have you done? These are powerful people." I tried to sound more confident than I felt. "Mom, it was the right thing to do. They were stealing land meant for people who need homes." But the real storm hadn't even started yet. Judge Harrington issued a statement calling the letter an obvious forgery and suggesting I had fabricated it for attention. Westland Development filed a defamation lawsuit against me for $10 million. The courthouse placed me on administrative leave pending an investigation. Most devastatingly, anonymous sources began feeding stories to friendly media outlets, questioning my character and motives. They dug up an old boyfriend who claimed I was unstable. They found a college incident, where I'd been written up for a dormitory violation. They even suggested I was romantically involved with someone at the rival development company. "Classic character assassination," Sarah said grimly. "They're trying to make the story about you instead of about the corruption." I wasn't prepared for how isolating it would become. Colleagues I'd worked with for years stopped returning my texts. Friends started declining invitations, saying they didn't want to get caught in the middle. Even my landlord hinted that all the media attention was disruptive to the building. The only bright spot was the public response. Housing activists rallied around me. Social media campaigns sprung up with hashtags like "No One I Stand With Emily" and "Boston Corruption." Ordinary people sent messages of support, sometimes with their own stories of housing struggles. One night, around 2 a.m., unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through these messages, tears streaming down my face. A woman named Teresa had written about how her family of 4 was living in a one-bedroom apartment because they couldn't afford anything larger. "Thank you for fighting for families like mine," she wrote. That's when I knew, no matter what happened to me personally, I couldn't back down. The turning point came 3 weeks in. A young reporter from the Boston Phoenix, an independent news site, had been digging deeper than the major outlets. She uncovered financial connections between Judge Harrington, Mayor Wilson, and the primary investor in Westland Development. They had all attended the same exclusive golf club, and the judge had received consulting fees from a company owned by the developer's brother. More importantly, she found 2 former city planners willing to speak on record. They confirmed that the affordable housing designation had been mysteriously reversed after a closed-door meeting between the mayor and Judge Harrington. The story shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't just some disgruntled employee with a suspicious document. There was a pattern of evidence suggesting exactly the kind of corruption I'd alleged. The FBI announced a formal investigation. State officials, sensing which way the wind was blowing, finally acknowledged receipt of my whistleblower complaint and promised a thorough review. The defamation suit was put on hold pending these investigations. I still didn't have my job back. I was still drowning in legal bills despite Sarah working pro bono. My reputation had taken hits that would never fully heal. But for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that the truth might actually prevail. Then came the threat. It was a Tuesday evening. I was walking home from a meeting with Sarah, cutting through Boston Common as the sun set. My phone rang. Unknown. Number. "Is this Emily Parker?" A man's voice, unfamiliar. "Yes. Who's this?" "Someone who knows what happened to the last person who crossed Judge Harrington. That environmental case in 2018? That whistleblower doesn't work in this state anymore. Can't even get a job stocking shelves." My blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "Recant. Say you made a mistake. The letter was misfiled, misinterpreted. Do it by Friday, or your life as you know it is over." The line went dead. I stood frozen in the middle of the park, people streaming past me on their evening commutes. The threat echoed in my head. With shaking hands, I called Sarah. "They're getting desperate," she said after I recounted the call. "This is actually good news." "How is being threatened good news?" I demanded. "Because they wouldn't bother if they weren't worried. I think we're close to breaking this open." We reported the threat to the FBI agents handling the investigation. They took it seriously, setting up additional patrols near my apartment and helping me establish better security practices. But the fear lingered. That Friday, their deadline, came and went. I didn't recant. Instead, I gave an interview to the Boston Phoenix, describing the threat and reaffirming everything I'd said. Before, the following Monday, I woke to breaking news. Judge William Harrington had resigned, effective immediately, citing personal health concerns. When Judge Harrington resigned, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. His resignation wasn't an admission of guilt, at least not publicly. He maintained his innocence while stepping down to focus on clearing my good name. The mayor continued to deny any impropriety. Westland Development insisted they had followed all proper procedures. The case entered a strange limbo. The FBI investigation continued, but seemed to move at a glacial pace. The courthouse kept me on administrative leave, neither firing me nor allowing me to return. I survived on donations from a GoFundMe campaign set up by housing activists and took odd jobs that I could do remotely. "The system is designed to wait you out," Sarah explained during one of our strategy sessions. "They hope you'll run out of money, energy, or courage before they're forced to act." But I had unexpected allies. The Boston Phoenix continued publishing updates on the investigation. Housing activists kept the pressure on city officials. Anonymous courthouse employees began leaking other documents showing questionable decisions, in cases involving prominent developers. What started as one letter had ballooned into a full-scale investigation of corruption throughout Boston's development approval process. 3 city councilors called for the mayor's resignation. The state attorney general convened a grand jury. 6 months after finding that letter, I received a call from the FBI agent handling my case. "Ms. Parker, we'd like you to come in tomorrow. There have been developments." The next day, Sarah and I sat in a sterile federal building conference room as Agent Reynolds laid it out. They had flipped Judge Harrington's clerk. In exchange for immunity, he had provided detailed testimony about a years-long pattern of corruption involving the judge, the mayor, and several prominent developers. "Your letter was just the tip of the iceberg," Reynolds said. "We've uncovered at least 15 similar cases where affordable housing or public use land was diverted to luxury development through manipulated judicial decisions." The grand jury was issuing indictments: the mayor, the judge, 3 developers, several city officials. "What about my job?" I asked. "My reputation?" Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "That's not really our jurisdiction. But I can tell you that when this all becomes public, you're going to be vindicated. People will know you were telling the truth." She was right about the vindication. The indictments made national news. Boston's big dig into corruption became a recurring segment on cable news. Housing advocates across the country cited the case in their own battles against developer influence. The courthouse finally ended my administrative leave, offering reinstatement with back pay. They even suggested a promotion. The defamation lawsuit was withdrawn. Old colleagues suddenly remembered my phone number. But returning to my old life wasn't as simple as I'd imagined. The experience had changed me. I'd seen behind the curtain of how power really worked in my city, and I couldn't unsee it. After much soul-searching, I declined the courthouse position. Instead, I accepted an offer from the nonprofit where Sarah worked, focusing on government accountability and transparency. My experience made me valuable in training other potential whistleblowers about what to expect and how to protect themselves. The affordable housing that should have been built on that waterfront property? After the criminal cases concluded, the city reclaimed the land. The new mayor, elected on a reform platform, fast-tracked the original development plan. I was invited to the groundbreaking ceremony. Standing there with a ceremonial shovel, looking out over Boston Harbor, I thought about that moment in the records room. How close I had come to simply putting that letter back where I found it. How different my life, and the lives of countless Boston families would have been if I had chosen the easier path. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked, coming to stand beside me as the crowd dispersed. I considered the question carefully. The past year had been the hardest of my life. I'd lost friends, faced threats, and experienced anxiety I never knew was possible. But I'd also found purpose and community I never expected. "Not one," I replied. "Some secrets shouldn't stay hidden." As we walked away from the future site of homes for hundreds of families, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Another courthouse employee in another city had come forward with evidence of judicial corruption in development cases. The article mentioned my case as their inspiration. I smiled. Perhaps the most important thing I'd learned was that systems only change when people are brave enough to speak up, and when others are brave enough to listen and act. One letter, one voice, one moment of courage could ripple outward in ways you'd never expect. The fight for affordable housing and against corruption wouldn't end with my case. But maybe, just maybe, I'd helped make that fight a little more winnable for the next person. And that was worth everything it had cost me.